classical theology would highlight three kind of levels of worship or praise. You would have Dulia, Hyperdulia, and Latria. So Dulia would be kind of what we're talking about right now, like this veneration of the saints. You could tie an intercession with that because basically Dulia comes from the Latin meaning slave or servant. So basically we are showing reverence for the servants of God, right? That's what Dulia is. We're showing reverence for the servants of God. And that's what veneration is. Veneration is to show great respect, reverence. You know, St. Paul's followers, I guarantee they revered him. Did it take away their devotion to Christ? Absolutely not. Probably it amplified it because they saw God's work through him. So that's Dulia. That's kind of proper reverence or veneration to the saints. Then we have Hyperdulia, right? So hyper is meaning beyond. It can mean excessive, but in this sense, I think the proper understanding is it means beyond. It doesn't mean excessive. It doesn't mean too much. It means beyond that praise of reverence for the servants of God. Because Mary's kind of set apart as a servant of God, right? She's not like St. Paul. Like a lot of times, like we hear the word slave, or like Paul says, "I'm a slave for Christ." We're like, that's a little too much for me. Well, basically it means that he's submitted. He's under God's authority. And Mary, in a way, is like set apart from that, right? Mary is set apart from that in her bearing God, right? And her having that initial fiat, that initial yes. So that's the reverence or veneration we hold for Mary is Hyperdulia. And then we have adoration, which is solely for God alone. And then Latria is adoration. And I don't know, Sean, if we want to like talk about how we experience the difference, because as a Catholic, we know the difference,
right?
But maybe it might help to like explain the difference of.
Sure, that might be helpful because I do think sometimes that like maybe like the Church, of course, has never taught that there should be any, disordered type of honor of Mary or the saints like above Christ, but maybe in practice, or at least like how it looks to people, sometimes it might seem as if that's the case. And I know for me, like there's been some times where like based on like popular piety or based on some people's like particular devotions, it can almost appear as if like they are giving this worship to Mary rather than God. So yeah, maybe if you could just speak a little bit to like how does that play out in our life, and what really makes like giving God our worship or our adoration distinct from the honor that we're giving to Mary and the saints.
Right. I think like for me, at least like in experiencing Dulia, or that reverence toward the saints, there's always kind of like an admiration. There's always an admiration that kind of begins and then directs me towards God, right? So Dulia is always ordered towards, ultimately can lead you to adoration of the proper person,
right? Being
God. I'm wearing a shirt. This is kind of the Giorgio Frassati shirt. If you know much about him, I mean, you can't not want to know more about God in reading about this young man's life. He died when he was 24, Italy, decades ago. But his life is kind of a bridge to adoration of God. Right. So Dulia always serves a purpose. Dulia is always a means to an end. Dulia is never we never stop. At Dulia. Right. Then we have, Hyperdulia, which in prayer, like if I'm praying the rosary, which I'm terrible at, need to get back to that. But in like the nature of the rosary is we are reflecting on the mysteries. So whether they're the joyful, the sorrowful, the luminous, we're reflecting on these instances in the Gospels through Mary's eyes. And all these instances are focusing on Christ, right? So it's this maternal glance, this maternal view at the life of God incarnate. So that hyperdulia, again, is not the end. It's another means to an ultimate end of worship that kind of leads us further to that adoration, that perfect worship of God. And Latria is ultimately like I don't know, like I think Latria like adoration can just be um like stillness. I mean, if for our viewers that have never done adoration, have never prayed and adored the Blessed Sacrament when it's exposed, you don't always have to do much, right? A lot of times, I think the Holy Hour in the Catholic Church is modeled after, you know, the big three apostles staying watch with Jesus,
Yep.
and that was hard enough for them just to stay watch. And there is just being in God's presence. Is probably the simplest form of adoration, but also a very profound understanding of adoration as well. Like I don't just sit in the presence of the saints.
Yeah.
You know, I don't just sit in the presence of Mary while I pray the Rosary, because the nature of the Rosary, it's ordered towards Christ. It's ordered towards the unfolding mysteries of his life. So there is like a natural. It's like if you're doing it right, there's an unavoidable progression through these steps of praise. So I hope that helps.
I love that. I think that's helpful for me. I actually really like that description. You know, like the latria, the worship. I just think of like, you know, like orienting our life towards Christ. Like that is the end. I love it's not a means to an end. That is the end. That's how our whole life, everything we do, our whole being should be oriented to Christ. Like he should be the center of our life. But then this honor that is due to the saints and Mary, again, or because Christ has given that honor to them, not because of themselves, but because of the grace of God. And yeah, it should be a means to an end. It should point us to Jesus. If it becomes an end, it becomes disordered. And I think, I mean, maybe just another level of like reverence. Like we have reverence for one another. Like all of us probably know people in our life who like we really admire in the faith, like who really help us to follow Jesus more closely because of the way in which they pray and they live their life. And I've had mentors in my life in particular who have like I really look up to and revere in that way in the faith. And again, that's just a means to Christ. Like it's a bridge to Christ. It would be disordered if I like started giving my life to them, to that person, and like that became the end in and of itself. Yeah, so I really think that's a helpful distinction, that the saints, that Mary, are always a bridge to Jesus. They always lead us to Jesus.